So I want to talk a little bit about how I did the text for the Blenderman titles very quickly. And if you Shift A, we can insert a text object. I'm going to rotate it on the x-axis. I'll rotate it to 90 degrees. Now, if you're creating certain objects, you might notice that the scale of your object might be slightly different to the scale of the object in my scene. I've got my grid and my units set up slightly differently than default, but this shouldn't really change anything. It just might mean you have to scale your values a little up or a little down, depending on your own scene. Now, I've created this text object. To edit the text itself, we can just hit Tab. I'm going to put in Blenderman here, and hit Tab again to go out. Now, I like to center this text. That way I know if I put a camera in the center here, then my text is going to be pretty much centered. Sometimes, depending on your font, it can be slightly off-center. And the cool thing is, if you go down here, you've got a whole bunch of stuff extra that you could actually change. And we could change the X and Y offset for the text. So if you run into trouble with text not being 100% centered, you could use these X and Y offsets as well. Not only do you have horizontal alignment, but you've also got vertical alignment, and you can change the letter spacing, the word spacing, and the line spacing. Now, word and line aren't really going to do much in this case because we only have one word and one line, so we don't really see anything changing. But the letter spacing, for example, you could animate, and if you want sort of titles that move apart from each other, then you could have them animate very easily, and the text still being editable makes that you could sort of make a template and then use it over and over again for different titles if you need to. I'm going to leave the spacing at 1, and I'm going to upscale this text just a little bit, and I'm going to choose a font. Now, the biggest difference between Blender and other applications when it comes to font management is actually that you actually have to select the font file itself. Now, in the beginning, it might be a little weird if you're used to other stuff, but I quite like this because that way I can copy the font file into my project, I can archive it with the project, and I don't have to worry if I open it at a later date if my font files are going to be there, if it's installed on my computer, and it just saves you a little bit of time in the future if you ever need to reuse any of this stuff. So I'm going to hit the Chonga 1 Italic font here. This is the same font that I used for the final project. I got this from Google Fonts. All of their fonts are licensed under an open font license, so I'm able to include it in the project as well. But if you just go to fonts.google.com, you can download a whole slew of fonts. That being said, some are better than others, but I think most of them, if not all of them, are registered under an open font license, which is really cool because it allows you to use them in an open way, and you don't have to worry about licensing too much as long as you include the license with the fonts, which I have done with this project as well. So with that selected, I'm going to do a couple of things. Now, I like this font because the italic sort of gives it a bit of a superhero movie vibe type thing. Obviously, this is all subjective, so choose whichever font you want and have fun with it. Now, a couple of things that I like to use. The first one is the extrude. Let's say I put it to 1 or 0.15. Again, if these values are different on your machine, don't worry about it. Like I said, I have my units set up slightly differently than default. So now I have the giant Blenderman here, and I'd like to add in just a little bevel over on the side. And the reason we do this, so I'm just going to hit something like 0.01. This is a very tiny bevel, but it's just enough. But the reason that I do this is if you're starting to light this, or if you're going to put an HDR in the file, these bevels, they catch the light really nicely, and once you start putting them in compositing and adding some glow and stuff to them, you get all these nice glints and stuff as the HDR or your lighting sort of gets animated and moves around, and it looks really interesting. So when I use the bevel, as you might have noticed, if I just up the bevel here, your text actually becomes larger. Now, I like trying to preserve the original volume of the font so that I have a good idea of what's actually going on in my scene. So whenever I use the bevel, so let's say I put it back to 0.1, I'll use the offset with a minus 0.01, so it moves it back in, and then this is the original size of the font with beveled edges. Of course, you don't have to do that. It's just something that I like to do, but I wanted to show you the way the offset works as well. You can make your fonts bigger and smaller. Now, as you might notice, sometimes if you go too extreme, you'll start getting these weird intersections and these weird cuts, so you might want to watch out with those. Now, next thing I'm going to do is just duplicate this and put it in the same place. And with the second text, I can actually decrease the offset and increase the extrude, and now we have two pieces of text that are both beveled, and we have this nice double bevel going on, which makes it look really slick really quickly. Now, one last thing I want to talk about with this bevel is that you can up the resolution, for example. Right now, if we go into our wireframe view, you can see this is just a single polygon and the bevel isn't really nice and rounded. So you could bring this resolution up to something like 8. As you can see, we've got 8 subdivisions now, and you can get slightly nicer text. I think once I hit the... Oh no, I'm not actually able to smooth it out, but that's no big deal. If you were to change this to a polygon object, once you're done editing the text, if you hit the smooth over here in the tools section, then you could smooth it out and you get a really nice flat text with some really interesting looking bevels. Now, the reason I keep these to 0 in the BlenderMan project, it's not really personal preference or anything, but I knew the titles weren't going to be that huge and you weren't really going to see much of a difference. And as long as they catch the highlights like they're supposed to, it's just fine and I'm not too worried about it. Now, if you ever want to go back in and change this text, all you need to do is hit tab, change the text. So I'm going to change it back to text, for example. Do the same on the other text. And as long as they stay in the same place, and they stay aligned, you get this nice double bevel and you can iterate really quickly. So this allows you to make a template for your titles and just throw out a bunch of titles that you need. Now, there's some other things as well. I'm just going to hide this second one. For example, if you need to offset the text or you want to animate it moving from left to right, I generally just use this offset because it's really easy to use and you can just animate that if you want to. Or I believe in the final files, I think I might have just animated the position of the text itself as well, which works just fine. Then the letter spacing is really cool. If you sort of animate it out or animate it back in, you can get some really dynamic titles without having to do too much animation, without splitting up the text too much. If you want to keep it sort of basic but have it move in nicely. You could do the same thing for word spacing and line spacing, but obviously we're going to need an extra word, so text, word, and line. So that way we can see what happens. If we change the letter spacing, it changes it for everything. If we change the word spacing, you can see the spacing between the words obviously changes. And if we can change the line spacing, we can bring this in a little bit, maybe put it in a little bit closer. And the cool thing is all of this still remains editable, and we could just duplicate it again once we're done and use the same trick as the previous text by bringing in the offset a little bit and bringing up the extrude a little bit, and now you get these really, really slick titles very quickly. You could actually even link the all the parameters that you're animating from one text to another, but generally I'm not too bothered if it's just 1 or 2 words. I just do it manually very quickly. So I hope that explains the text tool in Blender a little bit. I really like it. I think it can produce some really nice results, and I hope that opens it up a little bit for you.